The readings this morning are taken from Acts and Genesis. Acts 7:19 to 16. In our church Bibles, it's page 1055. The overview of the story of Joseph from Stephen to the Sanhedrin. Because of the patriarchs were jealous of Joseph, they sold him as a slave into Egypt. But God was with him, and he rescued him from all his troubles. He gave Joseph wisdom and enabled him to gain the goodwill of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So Pharaoh made him ruler over Egypt and all his palace. But then a famine struck all Egypt and Canaan, bringing great suffering, and our ancestors could not find food. When Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent our forefathers on their first visit. On their second visit, Joseph told his brothers who he was, and Pharaoh learned about Joseph's family. After this, Joseph sent for his father Jacob and all his family, in total 75 in all. When Joseph went down to Egypt, where he and our ancestors died, their bodies were brought back to Shechem, placed in a tomb that Abraham had bought from his son Hamor at Shechem for a certain sum of money. Let us turn to Genesis 50, 15 to 26, in our church Bibles, page 52. Joseph rescues his brothers. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" So they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are set to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father." When their message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him, saying, "We are your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. The death of Joseph. Joseph stayed in Egypt along with all his father's family. He lived 110 years and saw the third generation of Ephraim's children. Also the children of Micaiah, son of Manasseh, were placed at birth on Joseph's knees. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said, "God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place." So Joseph died at the age of 110, and after they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. God blesses the public reading of his word. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Give her a clap. There was a long passage. And it definitely wasn't an easy one. I threw you under the bus there. Sorry about that. How are we all this morning? Right, you gave Saddam a much better response than you gave me there. How are we all this morning? I'm going to take your silence that you are all just getting over being in the presence of God. So I'll let that slide this morning. I'm not going to speak too long this morning, but I want to talk to you about clearly someone's life very specifically in Joseph. Joseph was one of the 12 in the tribes of Israel. And the reason he was one of the 12 is he was one of the 12 sons of Jacob. So they went like this: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. He was the son of Jacob and his wife Rachel, and he was known as the righteous one. It does raise the question of feeling a bit awkward, though, as he is always seen as the favourite child. And I'm sure none of us in this room that have siblings have ever had a complex around that, have we? No? I'm the second son. Joseph was sold by his brothers to Egypt, where he ultimately became the ruler of the land. And if you want to know more about his life, I would really encourage you to read from Genesis 37 to 50. Let me just give you a few highlights. Genesis 37 talks about Jacob's favorite son, Joseph, and where he is ultimately sold into slavery. 39 is where Joseph is sold to Potiphar in Egypt, and he is later falsely accused of sleeping with Potiphar's wife and then imprisoned. Genesis 40, in prison we see Joseph interpret dreams of the Pharaoh's chief butler and baker. Genesis 41, after Joseph is forgotten about for a couple of years, he is eventually called to interpret Pharaoh's dreams, and Joseph's interpretation of a coming famine lead to Pharaoh exalting his position. Genesis 42 to 46, Joseph's brothers travel to Egypt to buy food because this famine he interpreted has happened, and they need some help, leading to this family reunion. And Genesis 47 to 50, Joseph provides for his family in Egypt, and Jacob blesses Joseph's son, Ephraim and Manasseh, who end up becoming another 2 tribes. So he has a very, very, very busy life. But that life is how I've described it there. He's a favored son, but he has a life of trials. And some of us straight away are going, that doesn't make any sense. How can you be favored by God but have a life of trials? Well, I stumbled across something this week that I love. You see, easy is never promised, but victory is. Easy is never promised, but victory is. Some of us sit in that place of feeling one moment like a favored child, but a life of trials. And it feels like an oxymoron. It feels like it doesn't make sense. It feels like it doesn't add up. I'm sure I'm only speaking for myself at this point. Thank you for the interaction. It's interesting because in all of the trials that Joseph has, it doesn't often feel like he does anything wrong. The closest, and it's only an interpretation, is where he is seen to be flaunting receiving these dreams in Genesis 37, 5 to 11. But once again, he's in his youth. You could see that as overexcitement rather than flaunting, and it's come from God. Ultimately, this passage is one where Joseph's story requires personal interpretation. It is a mix of what is revealed to him by God and what he chooses to do with that revelation. There is no mistake, God has revealed and does reveal to Joseph in this passage. The only faux pas or the only negative you could even tend to push towards is maybe the way Joseph reveals that to his brothers and to his father, that there is a slight hint of an arrogant youth. I've heard that phrase so much in my ministry, and sometimes it doesn't feel fair, so that's why I say slight. To understand Joseph's journey from prisoner to Prince, we need to first understand the trials he went through. But also to remind ourselves that even through every single trial, in the midst of the hardest things this man goes through, he chooses God's way. He lets the anger, he lets the frustration, he lets the sadness float away. And we are left with those famous words in Genesis 50:20 that say this: "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." I want to say something quite bold this morning. For God to move us from being a prisoner to a prince or a princess, it requires forgiveness. Because only when we see through the lens of the crucifixion can we actually start to understand that godliness requires forgiveness. Because if you want to look like God, you need to act like Christ. What are those famous words that Christ says on the cross? Don't say them just yet. We're going to come back to those. I want to really firmly say this morning, if you want to start to look godly in your life, you need to look at it through the lens of the crucifixion. Because the lens of the crucifixion shows us that godliness requires forgiveness. And some of you may be sat there this morning saying, "You don't know my life. You don't know my trials. You don't know what I've had to go through. You don't know how much this world has beaten me up. You don't know how saddened I am to even be in church." But there was no greater sin that ever happened on the face of the earth than Christ being crucified for us. He was blameless, he was sinless, but he bore our punishment. There is no greater sin than that the King of heaven came down in flesh, incarnate, through his Son, and was hung on a cross for each and every one of us. But what truth is being revealed to us through this passage? Jump ahead for me, would you? Favoured son to a life of trials. It's clear to me at the moment that God is teaching us as a church in this break we've had between our sermon series about heart posture. Last week, we looked at God looking at the heart before the talent. The week before, we looked at Isaiah 40, and we explored this idea that sometimes the wait is longer because the blessing is bigger. So it doesn't surprise me that we've been led to the life of Joseph. Joseph, someone who kept his heart right even in the biggest struggles of life. Someone who was forced to keep their heart right through the trials he faced. It did get me thinking, though, of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Because in this parable, the traveller is going from Jerusalem to Jericho. And whilst we are never told why the traveller was coming from Jerusalem, as it isn't the main lesson of the parable, there are one of three things he was doing. It would have either been trade, it would have either been something else, or there was the potential that this traveller was coming from the temple. That they had just been in the presence of God, and on their way back from the presence of God, the trial had happened. When we look at our story this morning, our passage this morning, Joseph has just received a dream from God, and he reveals that dream to his family. He is in the very presence of God. He's experiencing God. And then what happens? He is sold into slavery. You see, there's something here that we all need to start to deal with, and it's a hard life truth. Just because you worship on a Sunday doesn't mean the trial can't happen or the problem can't occur. Just because we are in the presence of God and surrounded by Him, when we leave this place, it doesn't mean that we are invincible. My little boy absolutely loves pretending, I say pretending because he's not very good at it, to play Mario Kart at the moment. And when you play Mario Kart, there are these little boosts that you can get. And one of them turns you into this invincible character where you just can't be knocked off. I think sometimes when we're in church, we feel like that. Sometimes we go from church and we feel invincible, don't we? Yeah, what a Sunday! God was there. I am amazing. Sorry, he is amazing. I am invincible. I'm in the presence of God. Nothing bad can happen to me. That's Sunday. And then Monday rolls around. And we get stuck in traffic, dropping our kids off to school. And suddenly, the potence of Sunday turns into the anger of Monday when someone cuts us off or when someone doesn't let us out, doesn't it? Again, I'm sure I'm not talking to many people in this room. You see, Joseph was in a place of a real high. God has given me this dream. This is awesome. Nothing can go wrong. Right? We have those moments too. We're in the presence of God, feeling awesome, feeling like nothing can go wrong, and then it all goes wrong. It all goes wrong, and it starts to break apart or fall apart in front of us. And it is so difficult. You see, the life of Joseph reminds us that even on our way back from the presence of the things of God, the world can still hurt us. They came, they saw, and they made him a slave. They threw him into prison. They gave him trials. But here's the hard part. Just that doesn't mean our heart is to become hardened because of the trials we go through. Our heart is to give up. Isn't to give up, but it's to give it to God. The crucifixion was the most horrific sin mankind ever committed against God. Yet it brought the greatest good possible, our salvation. And on that cross, Jesus said these words, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And do you know what their response is? And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. Even Christ forgave. And it still wasn't the response the world should have given. You see, forgiveness brings you closer to being godly, but it doesn't guarantee that the world's going to accept you. Father, forgive them, for they not know what they do. So mankind's response is to divide the Prince of Heaven's clothes up by casting lots. Shameful. It's not right, is it? But it doesn't mean he doesn't forgive. It doesn't mean he isn't pleading with God to forgive them. You see, forgiveness is not something we get a choice around. It is something we have to do. Even in the depths of Christ's suffering, he still focuses on forgiveness. If you want to know what godliness looks like, look at Christ. Not the world, not the trials of your life, but at the goodness of the Son. Joseph builds a heart of integrity instead of succumbing to bitterness. Joseph has every right to hate his brothers, to turn them into his slaves. Even at the very end of the ordeal, we read these words from verse 15, Genesis 50, verse 15 to 17. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they didn't say, "Shall we mourn our father?" They said this. Just to be clear, I added that sentence. "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all our wrongs we did to him?" Their father has just died, and their response is, "What about Joseph? He's so angry with us. What's he going to do to us?" So they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left these instructions before you died." The trial, the pain, the lies are still happening. "This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sin and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father." The last sentence says this. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. He knew what was happening. He knew what he needed to do. He knew the weight of these lies and this situation he was in. Joseph isn't weeping with joy. Joseph isn't weeping because his father's died and it's a happy occasion. He's not even had the chance to mourn his father. He's weeping because he knows he has to stand before his brothers and forgive them for the trials and the challenges and the lies and the suffering he's had to endure because of them. That is what a godly heart looks like. That is picking up your cross. That is a powerful moment. When their message came to him, Joseph wept because he knew what he needed to do, because he knew what came next. The wrestle isn't a sin. The wrestle isn't something that Joseph did wrong. When Christ is told the crucifixion needs to happen, Christ wrestles with God. Father, if it is your will, I will do it. It's not mine, it's yours. It's not my will for you to forgive your brother and sister, it's his. I'm not telling you you need to walk into that room happy, smiling, yeah, God, I forgive you, you're wonderful. But I am telling you, if you want to have a godly heart, if you want to have a heart that shines more like God, forgiveness is the center of what we need to be doing as Christians. It's not the outside, it's the center. The life of Joseph teaches us that he maintained a pure heart. In Potiphar's house, he consistently chose to do what was right, even when it led to false accusations and imprisonment. We are called to do more than what the world offers. We are called to be better. People that love before judgment, people that care before criticizing, and people that focus on God's way before our own. Christ was the favored Son of God, yet he still had to endure trials and hardship. Church, easy was never promised, but victory was. So the last thing I want to say to you this morning, the heart of a leader and a forgiver. Joseph shows us clearly that through his life, that good leaders lead through integrity. And let me be clear, every single one of us in this room is a leader. No, you can't talk to me, I'm talking to you. Every single person in this room is a leader. Because when you make a decision to follow Christ, and if you've made that decision, if you haven't, I would love to help you make that decision, just to say. But when you make a decision to follow Christ, you become a leader. Because the way you shine matters. The conversations you have matter. The people you speak to in your circumstances matter. You become a leader. And to lead well, you need to lead with integrity. Joseph's integrity was not just a personal virtue, but it was a foundation of his leadership. He was a man of character who used his gifts of leadership and discernment to bless those around him. Even in his roles as a slave and as a prisoner. You see, in the midst of the trial, the world is looking at us as Christians. And what if the world looked at us and didn't see someone that threw their toys out the pram? But what if the world looked at us and saw people that were willing to forgive even in the depths of our sadness? What if people looked at us, what if the world looked at us and saw we were willing to live differently? We were willing to love people and care for people before criticizing. What a change the world would be if they looked at the church and they saw people that were willing to love people, to care for people. When I say love, I don't mean you can't challenge people. You can challenge people in love. But to walk with people, to help people. I think it is so well described in Matthew 14, where we see Christ walk on water. And Peter has this famous moment of stretching, where he starts walking, and then he starts sinking, and then Christ pulls him from the waves. I want to finish, and I want to ask you 3 questions this morning. Team, if you would join me this morning, that would be amazing. Thank you so much. I wonder this morning, what is your stretching moment that God is pulling you through? What is your stretching moment in your life? Where God's not going to let it snap, but he is going to stretch you. Maybe some of you are saying, actually, I'm in that right now. I feel that right now. I feel like I'm so taught in this that it's about a snap. Maybe some of you feel like you're in that moment. Maybe some of you are like this. Nah, life's pretty good. I feel very loose there. Nothing's stretching me. And maybe some of you are like, oh, I don't even think I'm here. I think it's snapped. I want to say to you this morning, God will stretch you, but he will not abandon you. God will stretch you in your situation, in your life, but he will not abandon you. So let me ask you 3 questions. Team, please do start playing. Thank you so much. Firstly, what shapes my heart? Secondly, what betrays a good heart in action? And thirdly, how do we cultivate a heart that reflects Jesus? Because be ready, God tends hearts, not appearances. If that's you this morning and you feel like you need to find something new in that space, don't rush away. We're going to have some worship to finish our service, and we're going to be taking up our tithes and offering during that service. And thank you so much to all who give and enable the work at Delancey to continue happening. But what will your response be to the trials that harm you? Will you be stood there saying, God, what the world intended for harm, you have turned to good? Joseph's story reminds us that God can turn obstacles into stepping stones, and that our circumstance does not have to define our character for the future. I want to encourage you to hold your pain honestly this morning and watch how God works in the aftermath, forming character, opening up unexpected doors, building compassion in our hearts. How might God be using my setbacks to prepare me for service this morning? God's ability to bring good from evil doesn't excuse wrongdoing. I'm not saying that. But it promises hope and purpose amidst the trial and suffering. So if you need prayer this morning before you leave into that moment of stretching or into those questions on the screen, please don't leave this place without them. But all of us will find moments in our lives of stretching. And our response needs to be a posture, a heart place, that we will focus on what God is calling us to do in those moments. It's not easy, but easy was never promised. Victory was. Amen? Amen. Let's have some worship as we finish our time together this morning.